Hey, it's Mitchell from Cherry Audio, and in this video we're going to use Cherry Audio's new CA2600 synthesizer to recreate the classic Pete Townshend "Who Are You?" obnoxious guitar plugged into synthesizer patch. Pete made this sound originally in 1978 for the Who Are You record, and you gotta imagine that this was pretty groundbreaking back then because probably nobody even knew what they were hearing because it was this sort of weird hybrid synthesizer obnoxious guitar sound. So it's actually a relatively simple patch, and I'm going to show you how to make it in CA2600. Before we delve into the nitty-gritty of the patch itself, let's talk about the input chain. I'm just playing my Telecaster Parts Caster from Hell over here, and it's plugged into my Apogee Ensemble, just one of the guitar level inputs on the front panel. And then I'm going into Logic, and in Logic I'm using an amp simulator, but it's nothing crazy. It's just like a Fender type overdrive, just so it doesn't sound like a twangy banjo, and it sounds like this. But as you will hear, it's going to get a lot more mutated in a second. Moving on over to the CA2600 Logic side of things, the first thing you have to know is that I'm using a sidechain input. And sidechain lets you route signals inside of your DAW. And in this case, I am using an input. It's number 11 because that's the guitar input on my audio interface. And you can see it shows right there, record input 11. And that gets normalized to the preamp section. And you can see over here, if you look in the preamp section, you can see there's an input jack here, but you don't actually have to use that. That is really there just so you can route other things from CA2600 back into it. But by default, this little orange box shows you that the sidechain signal goes like this and goes through the gain knob here, which you can see I have at max. And actually there's this range control here. And like an original ARP 2600, it gives you a whole bunch of gain, which is kind of nasty. If I crank this up to times 100, a rather gross and gnarly array of distortion awaits. And I just have this plugged in directly to the output just so you could hear what the clean guitar sounds like. But I'm actually going to unplug that cable, because what's really happening in this patch is that the preamp is feeding the voltage-controlled filter. And that brings us to an interesting point. This sound doesn't use the oscillators at all. The oscillators are completely disconnected. You can see I have this fader over here up where it says VCO1, but I have this patch cable running from the output of the preamp. In fact, if I mess with that, you can hear the oscillator. It overrides the normalized VCO1 connection, so now I'm getting the preamp going to the filter, and you can see I've got these sort of turned down. This is around 900 hertz. And I've got my res up a little bit, about 35%, and it sounds like this. So what we'll do to make this interesting is we'll take the triangle wave of the low frequency oscillator. I already have this patched over here to one of the control inputs, and I'm going to bring this up. And it's starting to sound like the familiar Who sound. There's one other ingredient, and that ingredient is this envelope follower over here. And I'm going to show you this by turning down the LFO modulation and turning up the envelope follower. Now the envelope follower's name is sort of self-explanatory. If you feed something into it, it tries to follow whatever the signal is with a voltage. So if I whack the strings, then the voltage is going to jump up really quick. And you'll see here there's a jack, but again, this is normalized from the preamp. So I don't have to plug anything in here. It's already going in here. And this adjusts the amount. And I have a cable running from the output of the envelope follower to another one of the mod inputs. If I get this in the sweet spot, you'll hear that when I hit the guitar harder, I have some control over how bright it is. And that's really the bulk of the sound right there. I did add a little bit of reverb over here. It's not real critical. I have it set to plate, about 20% decay. And you can hear that if I hit it quickly. If you turn the volume down, that's kind of important too. You can do those mellow parts in the middle of the song. Harmonics. And you can really hear the envelope follower as well when I do the punches. The one other thing that I did was I set up a stereo panning effect to make it sound like the record, because the record flies back and forth. And I did that using a basic tremolo effect in Logic, which you can set to be a panner.